Hey guys, today we're going to talk about Daniel. You probably know a lot about the story of Daniel and the lion's den from the Bible, but let's take a step back and figure out who Daniel was. So, in the Bible, Daniel lived in the region of Judah, so one of the tribes of Israel, and there was this king, Nebuchadnezzar, who actually invaded Judah and took captives, and Daniel was one of those captives. So he actually was a prisoner taken from his homeland, and he lived in this kingdom under Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar, in Babylon. So that's where the story picks up. That's where we start talking about Daniel. And in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, it tells us that Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. So he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. So Daniel, right from the very beginning, is set apart. He gets favor and compassion, and he decides to eat vegetables and foods that are healthy according to what God's commanded him in the Bible. And he ends up being more healthy than all the other young men that were captured. And so they decide, oh, we're going to feed everyone the foods that Daniel eats because he's healthier. So Daniel obeys God's commands right from the beginning, right when he's captured, and that is seen throughout his life in his faithfulness. So after King Nebuchadnezzar, there's a different king in charge of Babylon, and that's King Darius. So Daniel is a man now, an older man, and a different king has taken the throne and is reigning, King Darius. And so what happens is that Daniel still has God's favor. Daniel is still doing right in the eyes of the Lord and also in the eyes of King Darius. So he ends up being in charge of a lot. He ends up being a man who has the king's favor. So they love him. They feel like he's a good worker and he's honest and he does all that they ask of him. He's responsible. And but the result is that the people around Daniel are jealous. The other leaders get jealous. So here's what they do in their jealousy. And this is Daniel chapter 6, verse 5. Then these men said, we shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. So they're saying there's nothing wrong with him except that he serves God, which we know is not something wrong. But these men were looking to trap him. They were looking to find him guilty for a crime. So they were like, well, we're only going to find him at fault for a crime that has to do with his God because he's faithful to his God. So what they do is they get the king to sign a decree that it's illegal to pray to anyone but the king. And for Daniel, he's a man of faith. And he's been praying 3 times a day since he was captured all his life. So what Daniel does is he continues to pray. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks to his God as he had done previously. So he's still doing it. He's still praying. He's still trusting God and faithful to God, even though there's a decree declaring it illegal. So these men created a trap for Daniel because they were jealous of him. And Daniel, I'm sure, is scared because he could die for this, but he trusts God and he knows that God is faithful and he does what's right, even in this situation. So these men, they watch him and they wait and they see that he still prays. And then they go back to Darius and they say, this is Daniel 6, verse 13. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. So they've created this trap and they've trapped Daniel. So in our story today, we're going to find out what happens, what the penalty for that is, and then what the result of that is. Daniel's faithfulness to God, even in this circumstance, even when it's illegal for him to pray to God, he still gets down on his knees and prays. And in this story, I think it's important to point out a couple of characters too. We've got the character of Daniel, who's faithful to God, he's trusting God, he's praying 3 times a day, right? It's not illegal for us to do that, but are we praying 3 times a day? The answer might be no. We should be. So Daniel's character is important, but look at the character of these other satraps. They're not worrying about what they should be doing. They're worrying about Daniel. They're all up in his business, if you will. And the result is that they're just causing trouble. They're telling on him. They're trying to entrap him. And really, in our own hearts, we need to be worrying about our relationship with God, not telling on other people and seeking to entrap them or get them in trouble. So I hope that you enjoy the story of Daniel and his daring faith, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. Have a great day. God bless.